Fights are unpredictable. Anything can happen in a fight and anybody can win. Even though we naturally have favorite fighters, sometimes fighters get bested or lose in a freak occurrence. In this video, we're gonna go over some of the worst defeats in MMA that had devastating consequences. Number 1. Ken Shamrock versus Kimbo Slice.
Loading with the right hand. It was all Ken Shamrock, now all Kimbo Slice.
Fighting is a tough sport. As fighters get older, age tends to get to the best of us in the fight game. No fight emphasizes this better than the fight between Ken Shamrock and Kimbo Slice at Bellator 138. Going into the fight, Shamrock was going on 51 years old, and Kimbo Slice was an up-and-coming fighter after starting his career doing backyard bare-knuckle MMA street fights. Interestingly enough, Slice had wanted to fight Shamrock for a long time going into the fight. Shamrock, meanwhile, had been on a long and slow decline. As the fight began, Shamrock took Slice to the ground and attempted to get Slice into a rear naked choke. However, his age showed, and the aged fighter was unable to secure a win via submission. Slice then got back onto his feet. Kimbo Slice took the opportunity to begin throwing strikes at Shamrock, and after landing a shot directly on his chin, won the fight via TKO. Number 2. Anderson Silva versus Thales Leites.
Anderson could attack, but getting some ground and pound off, but, he hung in the...
It's never fun watching an old legendary fighter past his prime getting beat by a young up-and-comer, but it's also not fun watching two fighters refuse to fight each other. That's exactly what played out at UFC 97 in the fight between Anderson Silva and Thales Leites. Silva and Leites refused to engage with each other, and instead simply stood in their stances opposite of one another. It wasn't until nearly the end of the first round that some of the action began to occur. After the first round, both fighters began to play to their strengths. Leites was a fantastic grappler, while Silva was known for his devastating strikes. Leites began to go to the ground, willingly, to try and grapple Silva. Silva, meanwhile, threw light kicks at Leites. Ultimately, Silva won the fight to a unanimous decision. Interestingly, this fight also led to Silva breaking the record for the most consecutive wins in MMA history. Number 3. Jose Aldo versus Conor McGregor.
The notorious Conor McGregor smiling. Oh! He slapped him!
The fight between Silva and Leites was an impersonal one. Neither fighter had huge emotional stakes. That definitely wasn't the case in the heated battle between Jose Aldo and Conor McGregor at UFC 194. Back at UFC 194, McGregor was merely an up-and-coming fighter. Aldo held the featherweight championship and was held in very high regard. Every other fighter treated the Brazilian with the respect he had earned over a long fighting career. McGregor, however, had no sense of respect. In the lead-up to their fight, McGregor ruthlessly trash-talked against the Brazilian. Notorious got deep into Aldo's head and filled the Brazilian with sheer, unadulterated rage. Fight night finally came. Aldo rushed McGregor and the two began exchanging strikes. As Aldo tried to lunge towards McGregor, the Irishman landed a punch on the Brazilian's jaw. As Aldo fell onto the canvas, McGregor went down and began raining punches onto his fallen opponent. The ref stepped in and gave the win to McGregor. This win remains the fastest knockout in UFC history, at only 13 seconds. Number 4. Beth Correa versus Ronda Rousey.
Ronda Rousey, the champion.
McGregor is known for his trash talk and has shown just how effective it can be. Notorious's bout with Jose Aldo is perfect proof of that. However, Beth Correa has had the exact opposite experience with her trash talk. Going into the fight, both Rousey and Correa were undefeated. Rousey in particular was a huge name in MMA because of her success in acting. She was incredibly multi-talented, only enhanced by the fact she was undefeated in the octagon. Correa, meanwhile, was a vicious fighter who was known for her win over two other fighters, Shayna Baszler and Jessamyn Duke. Duke and Baszler were part of a group called the Four Horsewomen, a nod to the famous WWE group the Four Horsemen. After her battle against Rousey's friends and fellow horsewomen, Correa held 4 fingers up and put one down. 2 horsewomen remained, and Correa was hell-bent on ending the third, Rousey. Before the bout, Correa even begged Rousey to not cry during the fight. It looked like it was the Aldo and McGregor fight all over again. But things would turn out differently this time. Both fighters viciously charged one another and landed strike after strike. but after getting pushed against the cage, Correa got hit with a blow that dropped her. Rousey won the battle and showed that trash talk isn't everything. Number 5. Ronda Rousey versus Holly Holm.
She's hurt. In trouble. She's hurt.
Ronda Rousey had cemented her place in MMA history after her fight with Beth Correa, but her ego grew after the fight, and as we all know, ego is the enemy. When Rousey faced off against Holly Holm at UFC 193, she put her ego before the fight. Everyone thought Rousey would roll over Holm with no issues. Even Joe Rogan commented that Rousey could beat some of the UFC's lighter male fighters. People thought Holly Holm was little more than a sacrificial lamb. But as the fight began, things quickly changed. Holm was able to throw plenty of counter-strikes against Rousey and had no issue facing off against the invincible fighter. Eventually in the second round, Holm won via knockout. Rousey didn't take another fight for an entire year. Number 6. Paulo Costa versus Israel Adesanya.
For body kick.
Holm was able to land counter-strike after counter-strike on Rousey. But you know who's an even better striker than Holm? Israel Adesanya. As they say, style makes fights. Israel Adesanya, a counter-striker, proved this in his fight against Paulo Costa, a pressure fighter. In the build-up to the title fight, Costa incessantly belittled his opponent. Both fighters were undefeated going into the fight, so they certainly had the merit to back up their claims. Costa called the style bender a skinny wimp who would run from his opponents. According to Costa, the fight wouldn't be a fight, it would be a murder scene. When the fight began, however, Adesanya did what he does best: counter. The stylebender was able to continually throw counter punches and low kicks at his more aggressive opponent. Eventually, before the end of the second round, Adesanya managed to win via knockout. The cherry on top, however, was when Adesanya actually humped Costa while Costa was on the mat. Ego can be beneficial, but it can just as easily destroy a person. Number 7. Forrest Griffin versus Anderson Silva.
I mean, that's just amazing. And again! He's out.
Although Adesanya wanted to shut Costa up, and managed to after dropping his opponent, not all fighters get as lucky as Stylebender. Look at the bout between Forrest Griffin and Anderson Silva to see a fighter who wasn't as lucky. Anderson Silva was able to fight opponent after opponent in entertaining and effective ways that not only got people to watch the UFC, but also helped cement his place as an MMA legend. Griffin, meanwhile, was coming off of a crippling defeat. Griffin had become the heavyweight champion after managing to beat Rampage Jackson. Griffin desperately needed a rebound win to recapture his place in the fight scene. However, he was going against Anderson Silva. Griffin kept throwing punches and other strikes at Silva, but they seemed to have no effect on him. Instead, according to Griffin, Silva looked at me like I was an idiot for trying to punch him. Silva, meanwhile, applied relentless pressure on the disgraced champion. This pattern continued. Griffin kept trying to throw punches at Silva, but Silva either slipped them or ate them with absolutely no effect. However, a bit into the first round, Griffin would ultimately be handed his loss. Griffin tried one final time to rush towards Silva. Silva stepped back and threw a jab at Griffin that dropped the disgraced champ. As Griffin fell to the ground, Silva went to begin pounding him until Griffin raised his hands in defense. As a result, the ref stepped in, giving the win to Anderson Silva, cementing his place as an absolute legend in MMA.